exciting to be here as a part of Writers CONduit, and especially to participate in believable world building.
If some of this is a little, if you guys have questions or I'm going too fast, please let me know. I tend to talk very quickly.
What made you want to write for kids? This is kind of the icebreaker.
So today what we're going to be covering is we're going to be talking about who can critique and kind of what are the different types of critiquers who are in the world around us.
So, for example, this is Pelagia, homeworld of the Sky Rays.
I've been doing creative writing workshops here where I live for a long time. It's always been this kind of format where we just set a timer, write whatever based on the prompt, and then go around open mic and just kind of read what we wrote.
So we're talking about cover art today. Cover art can attract readers or repel them. As much as we like to think people won't judge a book by its cover, we know it's true.
As far as I can tell, the best definition of what neurodiversity is any form of differentiation in brain function.
We are here to discuss NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month.
This is the traditional versus independent publishing panel.
I'm really into the academic side of mythology as well as the more fun storytelling side.
When you hit somebody, it makes a distinct sound. If you hit them in a certain place, it makes a distinct sound.
Welcome to Writers CONduit, finding your online community.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
And I have Clockwork here with me today. Yes, we will be talking about maths in writing, and how maths is not just numbers themselves, but the way in which we solve problems in maths is similar. Like, we can use that process in other things, which is why it's so we can use it in writing, because it is that process of problem solving. Yes. So first of all, Clockwork, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sorry, I wanted to get up where I could see it. Most of you know me as Clockwork from Game of Tones, but I actually have a master's degree in theoretical math. And until I was about 24 or 26, I don't remember when I graduated, it was too long ago, but my life revolved around theoretical math, and one of the things I think people forget is that math and philosophy are actually very closely connected. The logic that you use in math is often what is applied in philosophy, and that means that if you're writing to illustrate a philosophical point of view, you probably need to know metaphors and proof that the philosopher used to come up with that theory. And you're not going to get that if you don't understand at least the basics of mathematical logic.
I can adjust my microphone input.
It's just my side. Aha, okay. Hold on. No, that doesn't. It'll work for now if we talk one at a time. I'm sorry. I'll just introduce myself now and then I'll see if I can work a better option out. Otherwise, that's the whole point of this panel. Problem solving. We don't always get from A to B the way we think we do. But as long as we get there, we get along the way. Yeah, so I am Tara Fee Bell, also known as the Bat Princess in Game of Tomes. I am also, during the day, I'm a maths tutor, and so I did a words calmly. I finished a honours in chemical engineering at uni, and then I've become a maths tutor and have a life goal of changing the education system. Will be a long thing, but we'll start it. So, as I said, yeah, so I'm a maths tutor, known as Bronte Clark. So, too many arms. Yeah, so high school maths I tutor, between year 7 and year 12, so from, we're in Australia, so the whole secondary education set is, I tutor that. I've done some work with a maths textbook company in writing up worked solutions, which is basically just writing out answers and explaining why and how you get to those things, which every so often you get this question that it's like, this is a way to do it, but there's also this way you can do it, or you could do it this way. Which is fun, because you're like, yeah, here's this one line question, and then in my Word document it's like a full page of like 5 different solutions. Yes, so I'm also writing a couple of my own stuff as well, so in writing, which we'll come to later, but basically I've got 2 main stories. One's just a fantasy web novel, and then another one is is going to specifically be about either teaching or revising math topics you learn at school within a story. So lots of things you can do. Yes.
Yes, I completely agree that the way we teach math in school needs to change. There's a focus on the arithmetic and solving the equations without understanding why we know those equations work. And so much about math isn't just about knowing that 1 + 1 = 2. It's knowing that 2 + 2 never equals 5, even for very large values of 2, is a joke. But there are actually ways in some very advanced theoretical types of math you can get weird answers to equations, but that's not the subject of this panel. Actually, one of the things I wanted to talk about was, and I see Moon's question, and I will answer it in a minute, but I wanted to talk about this one while I remembered it. Codes are often an example of mathematics. So, for example, there's a historic code that is supposed to have been used by Caesar, where you take the alphabet, you assign numerical values, and then you change the numerical values in a very specific way. And you utilize the fact that there are, well, for example, our alphabet, there are 26 letters. So if you add 13 to the number, then put that in a code for each letter, you add 13 to the number, and then the person who gets it adds 13, and you look at that and you subtract. If it's over 26, you subtract 26, which it will be because you added 26 to it. You have the original number. But when you're coding it, you don't just add the 13. If it's over 26, you subtract 26 at that point, and that can make it very confusing if you're just looking at the numbers and translating them to letters, back to letters. Now, this is a well-known code, but it can be made more complex, like the Enigma machine from World War II basically used a more complex version of the same thing, where the first letter would be set you added one number to the number for the letter. The second one, you'd add a different number. Third one, you'd add a fourth, and so on and so forth. And you had like 6 or 7 or 8 different wheels that just wheeled the letter. And then when you decoded it, you put the settings in and you put it backwards, did it backwards. That's not exactly how it worked because I don't know how the machine worked, but that was the principle. And figuring out how to decode that when you didn't know what number, wheel 1, wheel 2, wheel 3, wheel 4, wheel 5, whatever we're on, that was a big issue. Yeah. And yes.
Yeah. Problem solving.
Going to Moon's question, I think Story Girl is right. Explain the maths in a concrete way if you can. You could even have internal dialogue where the character explores the math, like the logic of the math, with different examples in their head, and struggling to figure it out.
Similar though as well, especially if it's a complex with many like if it has many parts to it, you don't have to explain everything all at once. It's like with the other writing where we don't put we don't put a whole section of prose all about this one setting if that's not going to keep someone keep reading the story. Like we often put like descriptors of characters and settings and stuff within parts of the story, and that's the thing with describing maths. Yeah, with complex maths, like if you have certain topics you want to bring up in, you don't have to put it all at once. Like if you can split it up into steps and have other things between them, like that sort of gives the like you need that almost that time to digest that first chunk and then be able to walk into the next chunk. Yeah. Which I might lead into one of the things a lot of things. So, as I said, I'm a maths tutor. And so, there's a lot of things about just maths in general that I sort of try and summarize and like, okay, this is why is maths important? Because so often we, especially at school, we seem to separate the subject of maths with everything else, and it's like it's not separate. No, we don't use numbers everywhere, but that process of maths, that problem solving, that identifying puzzles and using logic, like, so yeah, so there's a few things that I say to my students. One is like, okay, so if you see a problem, know that there is a solution. Sometimes that solution is there is no solution, particularly if you're looking at roots of parabolas. That is actually a solution, is no solution if there's no x values, which means your parabola doesn't cross the x-axis. It doesn't mean there's no parabola. It's just where you're looking, there's no number there. But yeah, the biggest thing that I tell my kids is break things down into steps, and especially if you don't know a question. Yep, no worries, clock. What steps do you understand? Like, I even start going, okay, do you know what the question says? Like, if you can read the question, which in high school level, yes, you can read the question. So it's like everyone that I teach is like they do understand something. And it's like just reminding yourself, okay, where do you understand up to? Then you go, and because you don't know what you don't know, but do you know where to look, which is the next thing I say. And that's the thing. It's like, okay, do you have an example you can follow, either that you've already written in your book or that's in your textbook? Do you know who to ask? Your teacher, your tutor, your parents, maybe a senior or another friend. Can you Google a solution? Like, there are different ways, not just, from this number to this number, but getting from here's a problem, what resources can I use to get to a solution? And that part of it is what we use everywhere. It's like going, yeah, if I'm here, going there. Yeah. And that's what we also use in writing, is like, okay, we give our characters a problem and we want to move them to a solution. That isn't always a positive solution for them, but we still have steps to get there. We still have that problem solving, like just that, how would my character think? What would my character, based on what they've done before, what are they likely to do again? There's all those kind of things we're thinking about. Yeah, running calculations. That's cool. Running calculations, doing research on probability that a certain scenario could happen. I did a bit of that for my thesis. Yeah. that can be good. That can be tiring. We edit in writing. How many times have you got a character and you want them to get somewhere? Sorry, I'm just trying to put words into words, thoughts into words. Yeah, Story Girl, that's a really good point, using words rather than numbers. And I actually have one of my students, actually any mathematical formula, they have to rewrite it in words. Because that is how she thinks. And that's another thing that I find is really important in any type of studying, is just working out how you do work. Yeah. And if you know the best way that you, what's the word? Either do your best way that either you think or that you understand things or that you can learn things, and revise and stuff, like the more efficient you are in that, like you'll be so much more confident. And it's similar with story building, and you work out just even the process of writing a story. It's like for me, I used to think that I was a plotter, which is silly because I'm very, very much pantser, discovery writer, like first draft, some people call the zero draft. It's like I start with an image or an idea and it's like I just run, see what happens. Even my second draft, it's like a mix of that and outlining and world building, and it just all mixes together. And it's when I figured that out, it was so much easier to then start putting my words on the page and just to continue. I enjoyed it a lot more. And so it's kind of part of a, I guess, real life problem solving as well. It's like, okay, this is how I do something. And then you can utilize that. It's like I have synesthesia, so I see words and numbers in colors. Which I utilize that for organizational tasks or for naming characters. If I know, okay, I feel like they're a bit of an orange, they're probably going to have a name that starts with R. It's, if you know things about yourself, you can utilize them to increase your efficiency of the things you're doing. Or just enjoy things more. Or both. They all work. But yeah, I was going to come back to what Clockwork was saying with codes beforehand. You can make up your own codes into your stories and stuff. So you can actually put, so either using codes that, or make up your own. Like when I was in, I can't remember if it was when I was finishing, so about year 67, my friend and I, like we moved to separate schools when we went to high school, so we used to send letters to each other. And we would make up codes and get the other one to work out what the code is, and then send another letter back in a different code. And like, we just thought that was cool. But you might have characters who do similar things like that. And like Clockwork was saying, there's a bunch of codes in history. So whether you look at those and use something similar or make up your own, the reactions or like, so with the Enigma code, like they took so much time to work out what the thing was, and the way that they on the other side, where they were changing the codes every day, or whatever the time period was, like those things you can pick out and go, okay, well, if they had a change in code, I could have a change in code. This group of people took, however many long months or years or whatever to work it out. You might be able to use that as a reference of, yeah. Yeah. Do you have anything more to add on that, Clockwork?
Yeah, just that you could even have that be a plot point. Suppose science fiction, your alien race is really good at math and really good at calculation, and they're the enemy, and you have to your characters have to find a way to make a code that they can't break, just using the math of the situation. Like, there are more E's in English, this word is the most common word. One of the ways in World War II they got around that is they used an alternate language. They would translate the language to Navajo and then encode that. And in the Pacific Theater, there weren't really people on the other side that spoke Navajo or even knew the language. And that made it almost impossible, if not just plain impossible, for them to be able to break the code. And you can look at how mathematical problems were solved in history as ways to model situations in your stories, as models for situations in your story. I also want to go back to Moon saying a lot of times mathematical theories have their logical math language expression, and then they also have a problem like a riddle or a story, a word problem version, basically, that isn't all about the numbers or the mathematical language. And you can use that to explain the situation better. I'm going to.
Yeah. It's kind of about finding how to yeah, almost like speak another person's language, but yeah, because you do it in yeah, it's like you think about the difference between a blog post and a journal being submitted for an academic, whatever type of journal, like, and like the language you use is very different. You could be talking about the same topic, but yeah, they're going to be presented differently. And that's the same thing in certain novels. You're going to expect different things. Now, in some sci-fi, you may be expecting more of the you might be expecting some numbers and more of the like particular jargon of specific things, but you still have to sort of spread it out so that Sorry, did I finish my sentence? No. Yeah, like you don't just have a full page of jargon because people would just pick that up and put that down. Whereas if you spread it out between it, like if you spread it between your novel, people might go, oh yeah, like they know what they're talking about, and they might look up a few words here and there. If they're looking up maybe 2 words a chapter, it's like, that's achievable, that's doable. Again, different genres, different styles, you expect different things. And yeah, that's going back to who is your audience and all those kind of things. So, Story Girl. There are some big mathematical problems that are hard to prove. Example, Riemann's hypothesis. PSMP. In the pursuit of those proofs uses an interesting motivation for characters in novels. Okay, where's me? 3-body problem is a well-known example covered in novels. Sometimes the application of those principles into real-world scenarios that really heightens attention. Any thoughts how you might apply that technique?
Well, I have for the Riemann hypothesis. The Riemann hypothesis has orders of infinity as part of its, not specifically the Riemann hypothesis, but like orders of infinity. When I was in a set theory class and we were talking about the different orders of infinities, they talk about cardinal numbers versus ordinal numbers. Like for one or the other, and I forget which ways it goes, but the real numbers are the first infinite ordinal or cardinal, and then the integers are the other. Or is it the next? That's sort of the Riemann hypothesis. But I remember you look at the fact that the way those infinite ordinals and cardinals are constructed is you have a set that contains the entirety of the set of integers. So, you have one of those sets that has the curly braces 1, 2, 3, 4, ... and curly brace, and then you have that plus 1. And I remember looking at that and thinking, so forever and a day. You can change the way things are expressed. You can see mathematical constructs as metaphors for reality. That's really all I have to say on that subject.
That's cool. That's cool.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. And
yeah, I think there's really a lot of different things you could do with it. No, it's good. It's good. I don't know what to say right now. So the specific untangling in the brain. Yeah, like I think that there's definitely different ways you can do it. And you're sort of going back to almost every other, how do you write stories? Like, research. And that's the thing. Do you want to use the certain mathematical concept as specifically as it's math, or do you want to use it metaphorically, or do you want to use it as, like, say if you had a like either fantasy or sci-fi where you have like, okay, this works in our world, but if it doesn't work in this other world, what are the differences? What would it look like? So instead of kind of seeing what it does, but what happens when it's not there, it depends what you're looking. So yeah, so you're going, but yeah, for some things, the history of how they've been looked at before might help. You've got your your characters. How would your character relate to it? And as you're saying, it could be a really good motivation. And then but then there's the building around that, like why is that their motivation? How does it like move them forwards? And that's, you're going to your setting and their backstory and kind of thing, like it all kind of interrelates. I don't know if I'm spiraling. Okay, start. Yeah. Example you think of would be the process of building a weak AI to run through algorithms looking for negative proofs, but finally getting to a point where it becomes a generalized artificial intelligence. What would be the biases of an AGI whose intelligence emerged as a result? That sounds pretty interesting. Sounds about biases of AI. Did you watch the AI in Faith? Not in Faith. Faith in AI. I forget what it was called. But yes, much interrelation. Clockwork, do you have any thoughts on this?
Just that is a question. Just the fact that it was created to look for negative proofs might bias it. Human thinking tends to be biased in a lot of ways. For example, we tend to look for examples of things not being true rather than think, they talk about this in mental health. We think of when we're thinking of proof of our competency, we tend to think of all the times we failed instead of all the times we succeeded. We can remember every failure we ever had, but remembering all the little things that we did right, everything we did good, is a lot harder sometimes. And if it was a generalized AI that grew out of a limited AI that was supposed to be looking for negative proofs, would it have similar bias? Would it tend to look at the world through a lens of, well, here are examples of why this doesn't work, instead of looking for examples of why it might? That's really all I can think of.
Yeah, and yeah, I think that's pretty good. yeah, Story Girl. It looks like it could very well have a very pessimistic worldview when you're looking at that way. Yes. Cool. So, moving on. Clockwork, did you want to go into the snowflake method?
Yeah, a lot of people talk about, I want to talk about it not being just using math in your story. It's also about using math to make story. The snowflake method is very famous, very popular right now as a way of outlining your novel and then writing it. And it's actually based on a mathematical model. The author even links to the Wikipedia page that, sorry, I'm pulling it up on my screen and I'm trying to quote correctly. It uses the Cock snowflake, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, and you can just go to how to write a novel on advanced fiction writing, which is the author's webpage, and it says, for a number of years, I was a software architect designing large software projects. I write novels the same way I write software using the snowflake metaphor. Okay, what's the snowflake metaphor? Before you go further, take a look at this website, and it takes you to a page about a mathematical curve. And it explains the details of the math, but just looking at the picture, you get a sense of how it works. And a lot of math is figuring out how to describe in computer-like language things that when you just look at them, our brains understand the basics of how it works. The Cock snowflake is an example of recursion, of defining things by recursion, where you start out with X, or you start, the Fibonacci curve is another one, which the Fibonacci curve is an example of how one can get to 5, which is a golden ratio, which the Greeks believed was the epitome of beauty. And it is true that studies have shown that statistically people prefer rectangles that have the golden ratio. They were asked to choose between like 2 or 3 rectangles. They will choose the one that is closest to the golden ratio in its proportions almost every time. Not 100%, but very close to. So there is some evidence that that ratio is very integral to our concept of beauty. But the way the Fibonacci numbers work, you start out, you add, you start out at 0, 1. Let's say you start out at 1, so you got 1. The next number is 1. And then the next number and every number thereafter is that number, the number before it, plus the number 2 numbers before it. So for the third Fibonacci number, you add the second and the first. So 1 plus 1 is 2. Then 2 plus 1 is 3. 3 plus 2 is 5. 5 plus 3 is 8, and so on. And as you get closer and closer to infinity, the ratio between Fibonacci numbers gets closer and closer to the golden ratio. And that's an example of recursion, and it's often found in nature. It is used often to model populations, how they grow. Seashells also have the golden ratio as an integral part of how they get bigger. And honestly, if you're interested in using math in your writing, watch Donald in Mathemagic's Land. Because it goes through a lot of the historical examples of math, how math is a part of our everyday lives and we just don't even realize it.
Cool. Could you just type that in the chat?
Donald in Mathematics Land.
Thank you. Yeah.
There we go.
Mathematics. Nice. Yeah, I was going to say something that you mentioned before, particularly in terms of rectangles, where we have a... Thanks, guys. Like we pick a certain thing. And I was thinking, it also reminds me of the rule of three. And just things in our language that we often gravitate towards. You know, and like if you have a thing in a list, like, you know, saying this, this, and this sounds so much nicer than this, 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 and this. It's...
Although that can be influenced by culture.
Yeah, there's things like that yes.
What number?
Yes. And that
is very much
so many things like another researching, like if that's particular in your culture and you're writing to that culture, that is something to note. Maybe. It's also something to note if that's your culture and you do that. Why do you do those things?
If you want a great example of how
do you need to do those things?
Mathematics in writing in an unconventional way, C.J. Chera has a series of books called the Foreigner series, and the Atevi, the alien race in that book, who are not the enemy, they're just it's about the diplomatic relations in a lot of ways. The main character is the ambassador to the Atevi, and their brains are hardwired for math a lot more explicitly than ours is, and their language is such that it's the grammatical forms you use in their language are based on the number of people you're talking about. Well, we do one too many, but they also have a belief that even numbers and non-prime numbers are unfortunate. And so when one speaks in polite terms, if you're talking to a group of 4 people, you always speak as though there were 5. And the math of the story is they found out that humans have talk about faster than light travel, which is a religious issue for them. How can there be something faster than light? Light is a constant. And they don't have the math behind hyperspace. And the main character has to go and find an astronomer who can figure out the math of folded space, basically, and find a way to explain it to them, given the constraints of their language, that doesn't violate their religious and cultural beliefs. And it's a great, if you want an example of figuring out how to include math in your writing in a way that doesn't feel like you're trying to be smart, and doesn't overwhelm the character development and the story itself, that is a great example of it being done well, the first 3 books in that series, I would say. And I can never remember how to spell her name, so I'm not going to put it in the chat because...
Can you type that one in chat as well, please?
I will type the title, and that I will preface my typing by saying and the author's name is probably not spelled correctly.
Cool. Just do it this way.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah, so I was going to say there's... Hold on. CJ Sherrill. Oh, cheers. From uni to shopping to writing. No, you're not allowed to cheat. Yeah, so I was going to say there's kind of... Hold on. Numbers. So you've got different ways you can use maths in a story. Either you can directly use maths. One of my things I'm starting is having a story surrounded by teaching maths. What Clock Rocket was just giving a really good example of is having maths just as part of the story. You've got maths as inspiration for stories, or using different concepts and writing kind of either for that or things like the snowflake method where you're using the concepts of maths in order to create a story without necessarily using that as the actual story itself. And then, yeah, and then it's just the whole concept of problem solving and puzzles and things to use within, I don't know if that kind of was the whole thing. Yeah, like problem solving as if your character's given a problem, how do you solve it? Who are the people your character knows? What are the things your character knows already that they can use and utilize in whatever story you've put them into? Yeah, so there's a lot of things you can do with it. And with that as well, sometimes it's learning about yourself. Which I guess one of my projects is a teacher in a fantasy world. And although I'm not expecting to write much about the things she actually teaches in the class, what she is doing for me, which I'm realizing as I'm writing, is that, as I said, like, I want to, one of my kind of life ambitions, I guess, is to change the education system. And me writing this story about this teacher is helping me put my thoughts into, like, thinking about this. What would actually be a better way to do assessments or go from school to further career or study? And so this story itself is helping me work out things as I'm writing it. And as I said, I am a pantser or discovery writer, and so I get to use this story for me just working out what I want to see in the world by putting ideas down and thinking about how they could work. And then as I get, people to read and give me feedback on the story, I also get then some feedback of, would this actually work or not? Yeah, that's just another way you can use stories to sort of problem solve, I guess. Does that make sense?
It does. I was actually going to suggest we are at about the hour mark. It might be a good idea to take like a 5-10 minute break. so people can go to the bathroom and so forth?
Yep. Yeah, we can take a 5-minute break. Would like to do that. Cool. Yes. So we'll check on break screen. So enjoy.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Okay. Okay. So, Story Girl has a question. And we both think it sounds fun. Yeah, use of mathematics as a theme rather than as a subject. For example, telling the story of a bipolar ham radio enthusiast whose moods are reflective of the sine waves which make up much of the original analysis work they do. Various areas could be an interesting way to deconstruct the behaviors of a person who strongly compartmentalizes their life. Yeah. As I said in chat, I think it sounds fun. Basically anything could be used as a story concept or a theme or whatever. It's just, I guess, how you put it out there. I guess for me, the easiest way to kind of say that, as I mentioned before, I have synesthesia. And so I see numbers and letters in color, in different colors, kind of my primary synesthesia. I have some sound color thing as well, but I was like, okay, here's the thing. I'm going to use this in my story. So the teacher of my story, she sees magic in colors. Because she's half fairy, and fairies can sort of feel the magic of other people, almost like a feelings fingerprint, but then this character can actually see it in color. So, similar idea of going, okay, here's this thing we can use, put it in a character. And then because my character sees this, that changes the way that she would either teach her class, but also, like, she had a lot of issues at her university because she sees humans have magic and they're like, no, that's not a thing. So because of that, like, it comes with, although there's cool things that come with it, there's also a lot of issues that come with it because she clashes with other people or other things that have stood for thousands of years, and she's coming in going, well, that's wrong. I might be going off on my own tangent here. But yeah, so it's that kind of, you're taking something, as you said, moods are reflective of sine waves. I mean, they're going to go up and down, up and down, up and down. So it's really, if you've taken that, then yeah, it's about what happens when that happens. Like, what are the consequences of it going up and down and the consistent thing. So I definitely think it's something that can be done. Any other thoughts, Clock? Okay.
Just that for the moods is reflective of sine waves. Speaking of someone who is diagnosed as bipolar, it could be about what they need to do to alter the curve of their mood so that it stays within the lines of the window of tolerance. So to bring it from sine waves to sine waves, where it goes up and down, but they can deal with the up and downs.
So you're mathematically changing the amplitude. But
yes.
Yeah. And then how do you change that into a person kind of story? Basically what you said before. Yeah.
I also, this is something I wanted to talk about. Bertrand Russell's paradox has the actual paradox that he came up with is that if you define sets anything is a set if it's X such that and you have a concrete such that. Well, in that case, X such that X is a set that contains itself is a concrete and it would be a set. The problem is that it creates a paradox. If X is an X, if that set is in itself, it can't be in itself. Excuse me. So all X such that X does not contain itself. If the set of sets that do not contain themselves contains itself, it doesn't contain itself. If it does contain itself, it doesn't contain itself. That can't happen, and that's the paradox. But there's a better way of expressing it if you're talking to someone who is unfamiliar with math, which is imagine a city where the barber shaves exactly those men who do not shave themselves and is a man. You could have a female barber, I suppose, and that might solve that variation of the paradox. Or you could say the barber shaves exactly those people who do not shave themselves. Well, if the barber shaves himself, he shouldn't be, because he shaves himself and he's not supposed to shave people who shave themselves. But if he doesn't shave himself, he should, because he's supposed to shave people who don't shave themselves. And that's the essence of the paradox. So sometimes finding an alternate way of expressing the theory in non-mathematical terms helps. I'm sorry, cutesy cat. I'm not trying to.
The essence is you can take a concept that might hurt someone's brain, but if you can say it in a way that doesn't hurt their brain, that's pretty cool. Yeah, which is cool. I mean, stories are fun because we get to play with all these different concepts. And like that whole question of what if that starts or continues so many different things for us as writers, it's like it can be really fun, and having all these different concepts that we can, pick and choose. Okay, let's look at this. What are we going to do with it? And then it's all those other things like thinking about who your audience is. How do we write this in a way that my audience will understand? And even just that process itself can be super fun. And again, problem solving. Yeah. Did you have more on that, Clockwork?
Just that it can be fun, trying to figure out what metaphor can you use for a mathematical situation that it's really just an example of that situation in plain language. And like you said earlier, you don't have to do it all at once. There is a graphic novel that I don't remember the title of or the author, but it's a biography of Bertrand Russell, the gentleman who came up with that paradox. And it talks about math a lot, but it doesn't use a lot of actual numbers. And it talks about how math it shows how math can influence philosophy and how that can go wrong too. And I suspect if you do a search for biography of Bertrand Russell, graphic novel, you will find this piece of work because it's very good. It was my brother's book. I read it once and I loved it, but I don't know where it is or what the title is. So all I can say is just search for things like that. Read biographies of mathematicians. Read what other people have done involving the type of math you're trying to involve in both fictional and semi-fictional ways.
Yeah, that's really cool. So we don't have heaps of time left. But yeah, just something else I wanted to talk about that we've talked about putting maths in writing. And one of my other projects is kind of almost going the opposite way, is using writing and stories to help logicomics. I think I've actually heard of that. Words, sentences, they work, yes. Yeah, using writing to either not necessarily explain the maths itself, but kind of help give that almost like that briefing time in between. Or in my case, because I work with high school students, instead of just having a maths textbook the whole time, and so this would work more as kind of like a revision or something extra to just sort of remind yourself, yes, there's these maths, but do it in a fun way. Similar to a visual novel, which if you're interested in visual novels, you should go see Sailing Ocelot had a panel yesterday. Yesterday in my time zone. But yeah, she has some cool things in the treasure chest as well about that. And so I kind of have this half almost visual novel style that I'm writing about this story about this high school kid who gets transported to another place. And in the end, there's this dragon they have to defeat because they need materials to get home through a portal. And so for each, because the portal he goes through gets crushed, basically. And he just had to send this message and go home, but the portal gets crushed, so he has to go to these different places to find these different materials so they can fix the portal. And that's kind of the story, but for every place he goes to, there's going to be a different maths concept from the New South Wales year 9-10 syllabus that is like, I'm going to have mini games sort of explaining the maths. And so this is kind of the opposite way, where it's like, okay, yes, directly actually wanting to teach or revise these math concepts, but doing it in not just here's a study worksheet or even an activity sheet, but it's like within a story that kind of keeps you wanting to move on to the next piece is the goal, I guess.
Yeah, that's actually really cool. I remember part of abstract algebra, which is proving that algebra actually works, is talking about the symmetries of shapes. And I am a gamer, and I had D&D dice, the 7 polyhedrals, but I could not grasp the symmetries at all till I looked at my D20 and said, oh, that's an icosahedron. Wait a minute, I can move it around and figure out how it can move around. So it goes the other way too. Like you said, you can use stories as a way to teach math.
Yeah.
or get people interested in the math enough to go and do their own research.
Mm. Yeah. So, so we don't have much time left.
Oh, Story Girl knew what I was talking about.
Okay,
So,
yeah, logic comics, an epic search for truth. Nice. Thank you. Yeah, so I was planning to have some, we are a writing conference here, have some writing prompts, but I think we have to head back to the Writers CONduit panel. Hey, still looking it up on Google. Problem solving, right?
exactly.
Yeah, that's what we're about
We'll
here.
use this to work.
Yeah, something I might just put up. I'm going to write the prompts in chat for if anyone wants to take them afterwards. And have some fun writing. Otherwise, you can leave them alone. It's up to you. Yep, true that. Google uses algorithms. And yes, I basically write fantasy. I have a couple times tried writing something else. That only lasted like 2 paragraphs. And then it was back to fantasy. So, we all good here. Yeah, I might do that, Story Girl, afterwards. The third one's just kind of a riddle, so that I found online. Yes. I think that's a good idea. Cheers. So, do you have any closing comments for us, Clock Rocket?
Just that, remember, math isn't just about numbers or solving equations or graphing things. It's a very basic, at its very base, it's about logic. It's about how do we write about, how do we put on paper symbols that mean things that happen in the universe, and how do we figure out whether things are true or not. And it is, at its essence, solving problems. How do we go about doing that in a rigorous way? And it's got its own language, but that doesn't mean it's only expressed in that language. Like a clock is an example of modular arithmetic. When you're trying to write math, look for examples of how does it apply to the real world? How can it apply to the real world? How could it be a metaphor for something else? And that's really all I have to say.
There we go. So, yes. Yeah. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for joining in. Thank you for the questions. Yeah, basically, maths tells us how the world works in the language of solvable problems. Enjoy the rest of Conduit and have a great time. Yeah, have a great time writing. Enjoy the rest of Conduit. Maths isn't just numbers. Can you use that in your stories? Or can you see where you have used problem solving already?
So I think that went okay.